So welcome everyone to our 40th anniversary Certain Point of View Star Wars Celebration panel. Excited you guys are here. My name is Marc Thompson. I am an audiobook narrator. I've been doing this for about 11 years. I've narrated well over 40 Star Wars audiobooks, and it's one of the, amen, thank you, it's a huge honor, and I'm a giant fan, so to be able to do this as my job and they pay me for it is kind of crazy. But don't tell them that because they still want to get paid. So I know you guys are here because you are fans of literary work and authors, and you're about to meet some very, very talented authors. And these stories, I got to narrate several of them. They're incredible. They're so much fun, and it's such a fresh new take on some of these characters, and a great way to kind of relive the story of Star Wars. But I know we are Star Wars fans, so we have to make this a little different than a normal panel. So when we're interacting with the authors, and we want to let them know that we appreciate them, we're going to do some Chewie cheering, okay? Some Chewbacca cheering. So if someone on the panel says something funny that you think is hysterical, we're going to laugh like a Chewie laugh, okay? Like this. All right? Let's all try that together. Ready? You can really get the nose chortle in there. Excellent, excellent. All right. And now let's say that somebody says something that's shocking or makes you angry or feel sad for a character. We're going to do an aggressive Chewie yawn, okay? Let's try that together. Oh, louder. Come on, they got to hear it. Very good, very good. And now, let's say somebody says something that's really exciting, like after this panel, you're going to get a collector's edition of From a Certain Point of View. Let's have a celebratory Chewie cheer. Ready? We got to hear it louder. All right, excellent job. Well, coming out here right now is going to be the moderator of our panel, and he is an incredible author, an incredible artist. He's a member of the Lucasfilm Story Group. So please put your hands together and let's hear a Chewie cheer for Mr. Pablo Hidalgo.
Good day, everyone. We are in for a treat. It's a treat so big we had to move venues because there's a strict fire marshal law in terms of how many authors you can have in one room at a time. This is an incredible project. It's been out for a few days now, so if you've read it, great. If you haven't, we're going to try not to spoil it for you, but we can't help us if we get a little too excited and talk about the book in question. And I'm talking about A Certain Point of View. It's 43 authors telling 40 short stories in celebration of 40 years of Star Wars, and an incredible partnership that we've had with Lucasfilm and Del Rey Books, expanding the Star Wars universe and putting Star Wars into print. So we're going to get things going because we've got a full day of incredible panelists, and they've split it up in a very interesting way. I've been likening this to we can't get all 43 authors here. We have a significant number, though. We have 19. 19 authors are going to be joining us. But we can't have all 19 at once. I've been treating this a little bit like it's a tasting menu of A Certain Point of View. So we're enjoying this in flights. And the first flight starts off on the bold side, a little bit of a dark taste. We're talking about the villains of A Certain Point of View. So let's bring out these authors who are responsible for telling us stories on the darker side of things, and we're going to introduce them as they take a seat, and I understand what order they're sitting in. So please come on in, don't be shy, welcome them out. All right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to introduce them one by one, and of course, if you love their work, no pressure, cheer them on. I'm going to start off with the person closest to me. This right here, he makes up one half of the author team of Ben Acker and Ben Blacker. This is Ben Acker. Together, Acker and Blacker are the creators of the Thrilling Adventure Hour radio show and podcast, and they've taken a spin in the Star Wars galaxy with the Join the Resistance series from Disney Lucasfilm Press, as well as an upcoming title from Marvel, Star Wars The Last Jedi, Storms of Crate, coming this December. Right next to Ben, wearing a really nice hat, is Daniel José Older. He's representing Brooklyn. He's the author of Bone Street Rumba novels and the YA novel Shadow Shaper, which was named a New York Times Best Book of the Year. Next to Daniel is Mallory Ortberg. Now, you may know Mallory as Dear Prudence from Slate.com. She's written for Gawker, New York Magazine, The Hairpin, The Atlantic, and is the co-creator of the Toast website. Coming all the way from Scotland is Elizabeth Wein. She is not only an author, but a flyer of small planes, which is great background when writing Star Wars. And she holds a PhD in folklore, which is also great background when writing Star Wars. Her books include Codename Verity, Rose Under Fire, and Black Dove, White Raven. She's going to roll all that piloting and folklore experience together in her love of Star Wars with her next novel, Star Wars The Last Jedi, Cobalt Squadron, that comes out this December. Sneaking onto this panel, no, that's not true. Sneaking into this segment, because I'm not convinced his character is a villain, but we're going to talk about that, is Kieron Gillen. Now, fans of comic books, now Kieron. Because he's worked with every Marvel superhero ever made. And he's also co-created the title The Wicked and the Divine and Phonogram. And for Star Wars, he's written the amazing first volume of Star Wars Darth Vader comic, which I'm sure you all are caught up with, as well as Star Wars Afra. And then rounding out the team here is Adam Christopher. He's a novelist, a comic writer whose titles include Empire State, which made several Book of the Year lists, and other novels such as The Age Atomic and The Burning Death. And this is his first foray into Star Wars writing. So another round for all these. And we're just going to get this rolling. Now, Ben, you write the story of TD-110, probably known to most people as the stormtrooper who bumps his head. Now we find out the story actually starts before that. He was one of the troopers that was on Tatooine.
Correct.
This is a question I'm probably going to ask all of you guys, but starting off with your character. Is he a bad guy?
Yeah, because he's a stormtrooper, and he's like, he's really committed to that as a mindset, as a guy, as a thing to be, but he doesn't think of himself, obviously, as a bad guy.
I think it's interesting. You and Daniel both taken an interesting point of view because you've both chosen stormtroopers as your point of view characters. And you've had the challenge of taking someone that is wearing a mask, but now we have to make him someone that we empathize with. So if you could, both of you could talk about that, that'd be great.
I mean, mine is cooler, so there's that.
Yours is cooler, you say?
Yeah.
Because you're cooler than I am.
Well, technically, I won't argue. I mean, look, all I'm saying is, my guy, Ramson Sardis, hates the Empire, but mostly because it's annoying, not because it blows up planets and stuff like that.
Sure. My guy, we're working on these Star Wars novels, and in order to sneak stuff in, sometimes you got to sneak stuff in. So in our heads, the villain of our second novel was this guy who said, "Move along," 30 years later, right? So in order to make sure we get that, we named the character Wanton, and his stormtrooper call sign is 110. Oh. So in order to coordinate with him that 110 was the guy on the ground, right, and the guy who bumped his head, this dummy of the Empire, 30 years later, is going to be the nemesis of some kids in Force Awakens times. So we wanted to make sure that that landed and tell his story from beginning to,
That's
to end.
That's deep history right there.
Right?
That's 40 years.
And
I'm not cooler, but I'm sneaky.
But it all happened because Ben jumped into my DMs, literally, and was like, "Can you make the commanding officer of your guy our guy?" And I was like, "This sounds really interesting." Yes.
Well, because when they talked about these these stories. We pitched, like, can we do the move along and then also make him the head bump guy? And we got an email back that was like, that's a great idea. And I didn't keep reading because I had other stuff to do. And Daniel got in the book, and he was excited on Twitter. And I said, oh great, which one did you do? And he said, I'm the move along guy. And I went, oh no, I gotta read more of that email. And it was, you be the bump guy.
Right.
And so we had to coordinate. It's a little behind the scenes.
There you go.
Is that what you asked?
Yes. I honestly don't remember. No,
It was a while ago. But thanks for having us. Great panel, guys.
Now, Mallory, I tweeted a secret to you, and everyone stopped listening for a second, except for Mallory. Mallory, your story was my favorite.
Pablo, you're my favorite.
No, it's so great because it was so unexpected, and it was something that I didn't realize I wanted to read until I read it. And for those who aren't familiar, Mallory wrote what is essentially a report to HR from Admiral Mahdi after the conference meeting where Darth Vader strangles him.
He's not mad. He's actually never been mad. He thinks it's funny. He's never experienced anger in his life. He just thinks it's funny how.
So can you tell us the genesis of this idea and any reactions from the Lucasfilm or Del Rey side of things along the lines of, you want to do what?
Yeah, absolutely. Although first I would like to register a complaint that nobody slid into my DMs about any of this.
Well,
My DMs are as open as my heart, guys.
duly noted.
Yeah, so I was really like overwhelmed and excited, and as soon as I saw that he was an option, I knew I wanted to write like an incident report, and I wanted to work in another like person I love ironically because they're terrible, which is Ayn Rand. Because she has that line, you know, a gun's not an argument. And he's like, look, he wasn't right. He was angry. He choked me, but he didn't argue with me. Like, I'm still right, even though I can't talk anymore. And I just love the idea of, like, somebody who is, you know, evil and banal, and who is miffed, but does not want to see miffed. And so just sort of like, look, I'm not mad. I'm fine. I get it. I'm used to a little backroom brawling, but his private religious beliefs should not interfere with our meeting about this military installation. And like, I myself am a man of faith. My native sector has over 300 different imperial recognized like religions. I just want to point out, I don't show up to his force meetings or whatever and try to talk about munitions. Like, we built this Death Star. I'd like to use the Death Star, and I will not apologize for that at this Death Star meeting. And yeah, just like getting into all the details of like, you know, he had to move closer to choke me. He would have had to stand pretty close to Alderaan to blow it up. That was my favorite line. He's just such a dirtbag, and I love him, and I'm sad he's dead.
It's a perfect testament to, it's like the absolute perfect Admiral Mahdi story you didn't realize you wanted. And thank you so much for that. Now, Elizabeth, your short story is from the point of view of one of the Imperial Death Star guards that's seen flanking Vader during the interrogation of Leia, and then later escorting Leia so that she could witness the destruction of her home planet. What I found really fascinating, like, that's heavy material, but what you've also added this layer by writing it in second-person perspective. I just want to find out the thought process behind that, and why you chose that, and what that means.
Okay, well, basically, it's because I never write an original story ever. And so my novel, Codename Verity, which is about a young woman who's working for the resistance during World War II and is captured by the Nazis and is interrogated and tortured. That's like, you know, basically based on Star Wars. And there's a character in that book who has a change of heart, who is a woman. Her name is Anna Engel. And so when this was offered to me, I was like, yes, yes, Anna Engel in space. I get to do it again. And that, and so the reason I used the second person, it's not the first time I've used the second person. My first novel, The Winter Prince, is in second person. But I used it on purpose because it basically takes away the gender of the narrator. And Elizabeth Schaefer, when she was editing it, actually was very careful about maintaining that. I had a couple of slips every now and then. So obviously the character's a man, clearly it is, but if you're reading it, it might be from, you know, your own point of view in second person, and it's to allow the reader to kind of get in there. But the character, the guard, those guys, as far as I can tell, they don't even have any credits.
Yeah.
They aren't credited. Their actors are not listed on IMDb. You know, they're just like, they're nobody. So these guys don't even have names, and yet they're clearly kind of, you know, highly placed. They follow Darth Vader wherever he goes. So it was really a chance for me to do the same story that I just keep writing over and over and over from a different point of view.
It's wonderful because one of the things you get is, you know, you realize you read the whole story and the character's not given a name, but you absolutely get a sense that because you have been this character through that whole the process of that story. So. Well done.
And I just want to say that, like, whenever I create a bad guy, they always start to, like, grow personalities and children and you know, complicated backgrounds. And I like the idea that there's that you can change. So yeah, that was me.
Thank you very much. Now, Kieron, you picked a character that is very near and dear to many people who have been reading your works, and as far as Star Wars goes. In your short story, The Trigger, we have Dr. Aphra on a salvage mission on Dantooine at the worst possible time. So, where did this idea come from, and was it always a given that you were going to do Aphra, or did you entertain doing someone else from A New Hope?
It was probably always going to be Aphra. It was a kind of like, you know, Elizabeth dropped the line. It was like, do you want to do Aphra? Like, you've got another idea, totally, but I would love to see an Aphra story. And it was like, yeah. If I've never actually had my prose published before.
Yeah.
So in other words, I feel very naked. But the idea of like you writing Aphra and getting a lot more inside her head was something I wanted to try. You know, and the obvious place would be Aphra stealing some stuff entirely irrelevant to the plot and use that as an excuse to have a long debate about the nature of planetary genocide and how you would do it. So yeah, she's intellectually interested in the Death Star.
What I thought was you said you've never written.
No, I used to, like, obviously I load of prose. Then the second I fell into comics,
Yeah.
I fell into comics when I was 25. All my kind of like creative fiction was actually comics. So in other words, after I started getting published, it's just been like not prose, which is weird. As I said, it's like after so long hiding behind an artist.
I would argue, having read many of your comic scripts, that you have written prose because you had a lot of detail and nuance in there that the artist then delivers. But as you said, this is probably the biggest dive we've taken into Aphra's head. So did you discover anything new about her, or were you happy to get out something that you've never had a chance to get out there in an illustrated format before?
It's one of the things like Aphra, if you say it's like, is Aphra meant to be on the villain panel? You know, it depends what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
So the idea of actually her basically being confronted by, you know, she's an Empire apologist. That's Aphra's thing, is she's somebody who's kind of should be against the Empire, but she kind of finds a reason to believe in it. And this is, you know, planetary genocide. That's a very hard thing to kind of excuse. So taking Aphra at that moment of like discovering literally the worst possible thing and how she starts to try to justify it, but you still get that moment of like, oh no, this is a really terrible idea. You know, and that was a great place to really kind of put a spotlight on her hypocrisies. That's kind of the fun of Aphra. She's a really bad person, even if she's not a villain. You know, and seeing her kind of wrestle with things and make moral failings, this is a good chance to do that.
Thank you so much. Now, Adam, your story deals with Commander Pamela Poole, and we come to learn that she oversees the command section that, among other things, was on the other end of Han Solo's boring conversation anyway.
Right.
So, is Poole, do you think she's a villain? How does she fit on that spectrum?
You know, she's a career officer, and I think it mentions in the story that she's not really interested in being a hero or fighting for the Imperial cause. It's like she just has a really good job as a commander on the Death Star. And the thing I wanted to do was, someone mentioned like the banality of evil. It's like the Death Star is 160 kilometers in circumference and it has 1 million and how many personnel. And in an organization of that size, people don't have any idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So like she's
trying to like solve the situation where there's this antique, decrepit freighter stuck in a hangar, and like the scanning crew is taking forever for some reason, and she doesn't know. And then they get this weird call from the security level that they don't even know really exists. Like the story is full of them looking stuff up on their data pad. Yeah, and then Han calls, and they're like, "What? What? Who is this?" Because they're like, "We don't know what's going on." And then they have to call Tarkin, because in the scene in the movie, they come through the conference room where he's talking to Vader, and they're like, "Oh, there's a security breach on AA-23, and Tarkin's like, "The princess?" So they're in the control rooms going, "Princess? What princess? Like, what is going on?" You know. So like the whole thing is like they're trying to solve this situation. The whole story of A New Hope is going on in the background, and they have no clue. Because, they mentioned that the Death Star went to Scarif. One of the characters in the story has a relative who was stationed at Scarif, and they haven't heard from them. So, like, no one's like, well, we don't know what's going on. We were at Scarif, but,
Yeah, the idea that you could be on the Death Star and have no idea what the Death Star is doing at any given moment is very real, because go into any big office building, any big company, and ask, what's going on in that department? And they're like, well, I don't know.
Exactly, yeah.
Daniel, I want to get back to you because I just recently was listening to the audiobook, and we're going to talk about the audiobook in a moment, but the voice for your story sounded very, very familiar. Mm-hmm. Like, I know that voice. I've heard that voice. I've talked to that voice. You read your short story.
I did.
Was that a given? Was that is that like a Daniel José Older writer written in your contract? Nobody's reading my character except me.
I wish. That would be amazing.
Now, tell me how that came about.
I think I just told them I would like to do it, and they said okay. I had done my urban fantasy series, The Monster Roomba, and that wasn't a given either. And when I told them I wanted to do it, they were like, "That's great, come in and audition." And I was like, audition? For my own job? Okay, so I did, and I guess they didn't tell the guy in the booth that it was the author doing it, because at one point I kind of ran out of breath in a sentence, and the guy in the producer was like, "Oh, this guy hates commas." And I was like... And when you're in the booth, it's like the voice of God speaking to you, because it's just, you don't see the person. So then I walked out, and he was like, "I am such a dick," because I guess he realized it. And I was like, "You're not, I do hate commas. That's totally true." So it was fun, though. I had a great time.
So I'm going to open this question up to all of you because, we've lumped you all into the villain side of things. We've decided you've written Imperial characters. If you had a chance to flip that coin and write someone from the rebel side of things in this anthology, who would you take? Who would you do? Mull it over. Let's dive in. I think you're showing your true nature. It's like villain. It's not
just evil people.
I like Wedge Antilles.
Wedge Antilles.
I got to write that character in a Star Wars tie-in comic book for the Last Jedi.
The Storm of Crate, yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun to write this guy because, like, he's a survivor, and he just gets to go berserker in this comic in a way that, like, unlocked something in him for me. So I would like to write more of him. I don't know if I talk to you, or if we can get some kind of Twitter campaign, or write your mayor or your local congressman.
Your congressman, yeah.
But I would
write your congressman.
I'd love to write more Wedge.
I wanted to do the modal nodes. I know they're not necessarily, the rebels.
You're on the lighter side of things.
Yeah, because I'm a musician and I love music, and it's probably better I didn't, because I just would have gotten really nerdy about music and been like, oh, I wonder what key that song is in. So, it worked out for the best.
Even your nerdy is cooler than me.
I gotta go with Mon Mothma.
Oh.
Although part of what's painful about writing her is she has the most wonderful voice, it's so rich with sorrow and gravitas that I would want to somehow be able to communicate that through, writing words, which is hard to pull off. But ideally it would just be like her and Aunt Beru somehow just talking about who has to do the dishes and why no one else is ever up on their part of the chore wheel. It feels deeply important to me that we talk about who does the dishes in the Alliance. Just I know it's important that we have to destroy the Death Star, but also I do all of your dishes, and I'm really sick of it, and I don't get paid.
I don't know. This is kind of a lame answer, but I would probably go with R2D2.
That's exactly what I would choose, so that is not lame.
Would you write it in binary?
I would get my son. I would get my son to translate it into binary. So we would have an English version as well. Yeah, I think that his personality is this like lovely combination of very, very self-important, but also just really sweet. You know? And getting that combination right, I think, is quite difficult.
Whoever Luke sold the speeder to. Yeah. Like, did he try to fleece him? You know, how much they went back and forth? That's selling a car scene. I would love to do that.
I think, like in the final scene when everyone is like going crazy in the hangar when they're going to launch the battle, there are heroes that we don't see on screen that are somewhere running around doing something. I think there's got to be a story there.
Fantastic. Okay, we are wrapping up this first segment. I do want to add one thing. I do feel a kinship because I also have a short story in this anthology, and I wrote the Tarkin short story. And part of the reason I really wanted to do Tarkin and get in his voice is because, this is kind of embarrassing, but I do the temp voice of Tarkin when we do our cobbled together animatic version of Rebels that never sees the light of day. So I finally get to put that to good use. So thanks again to all our villainous panelists here. I'm going to throw it to our audiobook friend Marc Thompson, who is going to give us a little word about the audiobook for this project.
Yeah, so the audiobook's really amazing. I got to narrate several of the short stories in here, and then they got a bunch of different narrators as well. Neil Patrick Harris narrated one of them. John Hamm narrated a Boba Fett story that's really, really good. You have to listen to. So after you've read the book, you definitely want to try to listen to the audio production as well. It's got music and sound effects and lots of atmosphere. It's really fun. And I've gotten to work on a lot of the audiobooks over the years. They were originally looking for someone to do the voice of the Legacy of the Force series, so they auditioned me for that, and I got to do that. And it was a huge honor. I think I got the part probably because I could do some of the voices, like, "It's a trap!" And like I would like kind of, do the imitations, but then I had to learn the art of narrating audiobooks because that's a whole nother skill that I did not have. It was actually my first audiobook ever, was the first in the Legacy of the Force series, and just learning how to not just do the character voices, but learning how to actually make the prose and the description of the rooms and the description of people's thoughts make sense was something I had to try to get better at and learn. And over the years, I've able to have some practice, so it's been pretty cool. Do you want me to?
Yeah, let's move on to our second flight of a certain point of view tasting menu here. We got something a little lighter. This is the light side of the coin. These are the more heroic stories that you can find in the book, and we're going to do the same thing we just did. We're going to introduce all of our authors here, although many of you are familiar with many of these authors. So first up, she's the author of the Five Stars, the Firebrand series, Evernight, and the Spellcaster series. And Star Wars fans have been enthralled with her novels, Lost Stars, Bloodline, and most recently, Leia, Princess of all Worlds, Claudia Gray. Next to her, Meg Cabot is the best-selling author of The Princess Diaries. Just amazing. Over 25 million copies sold. As well as the Mediator series and From the Notebooks of a Middle School Princess, a series that she's also illustrating. And this is your first foray into the Star Wars galaxy as an author, and we welcome you aboard. Thank you for coming, Meg. Next to you, we've got Cavan Scott. Now, Cavan is the author and comic writer for children and adults and has written such beloved properties as Doctor Who, Adventure Time, Judge Dredd, and Warhammer 40K. For Star Wars, he's been writing our adventures in wild space for young readers, and he's logged a few parsecs of his own in this galaxy. So please welcome Cavan. Next to him, Emily Kate Johnston is a fellow Canadian. She's the author of Exit, Pursued by a Bear, 1,000 Nights, Spindle, and most recently, That Inevitable Victorian Thing. And she made a big splash in the Star Wars world by taking our beloved Ahsoka Tano and making her the star of a best-selling novel, Star Wars Ahsoka. Welcome, Eve Kate. Next to her, we have Pierce Brown. author of the acclaimed best-selling Red Rising series, Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. And this is his first foray into writing of the Star Wars universe, so welcome. And then joining us all the way from Brooklyn is Jason Fry. He is the best Star Wars cartographer in the business and the author of many definitive Star Wars guides from Del Rey and DK Books. He's written The Weapon of a Jedi and is currently adapting Rian Johnson's script for The Last Jedi into the adult novelization of Star Wars Episode 8. So welcome, Jason. All right, well, I'm going to start with Claudia. Your story, Master and Apprentice, tells a connection between Qui-Gon Jinn from the plane of existence beyond death. Not an easy job, I imagine. She's reaching out to Obi-Wan during that moment of time when Luke is rushing back to the farm to find it burning. So this is one of those stories that absolutely benefits from the perspective of having the 6-movie Star Wars saga, Clone Wars, and Rebels, and all that in our rearview mirror so we could pull from it. So what was it like getting a chance to pull all that stuff and to tell a story about Qui-Gon?
Well, I mean, really the way this came about was I wasn't feeling very well in the spring when you guys were first choosing people for this, and by the time I got there, like, everybody was taken. Like, you know, everybody, that shadow over there, it has a story, you're done. And I was like, who else could be in this? And then, you know, I'm always wanting to write Qui-Gon, I've always wanted to. You know, it's like, he's not in it, but he could be. And also, I'd also really wanted to write the Force, honestly, and Jedi. I mean, I've done 3 books, and that hasn't come up almost at all. So it was great to finally get to delve into that.
Fantastic. Yeah. Now, Meg, I reread your story last night, and you know, there may have been a tear shed or two. I'm not saying, you know, but you would tell the story of Beru Whiteson Lars, someone who, despite being a Star Wars character for 40 years and plus now, has never gotten the spotlight.
No, or an action figure until recently. She finally got one, yeah.
With hardcore blue milk porn.
So what does this character mean to you, and why was she your choice for your first foray into writing Star Wars?
Well, it's not I did write a lot of fan fiction when I was, I'm gonna admit, yeah. Yeah. I chose Aunt Beru because, to me, she is the most important character besides Princess Leia. And without Aunt Beru having been there to just nurture and take care of Luke, and then, spoiler alert, die.
What?
And so, oh God, you didn't see it? Okay, never mind. He never would have gone on to go and destroy the Death Star. I mean, she really raised him, and I think a lot of times caretakers in our society don't get the credit they're due, and people, and really, I think it's important that we say, I think Mallory mentioned this earlier, that, you know, the people who do the dishes and wash our leggings when we live on Tatooine and they get very dirty are the people we don't think about, that a lot of times, you know, get forgotten and don't even get like a memorial, a hologram.
It's so funny
to remember them by.
The most pivotal moment in Star Wars, and this is my point, like, the moment that makes it Star Wars is the thing that makes Luke most powerful, the most amazing character, is that he throws away his lightsaber out of an act of compassion. So, you answer the question that's never been asked, is where does he get that compassion from? Does he get it from Uncle Owen, who's going on and on about Trails?
No, and Aunt Beru was the one who kept saying to Uncle Owen, you know, he needs to go off with his friends. He needs to go to join the academy. And Uncle Owen's the one like, no, he doesn't want to. But Aunt Beru is there for him until she's not. And the fact that she's not there anymore is what compels him to go with Ben Kenobi. And, of course, save the princess, and then with her, destroy the Death Star. So she is the most important character.
Well, thank you for
and I got to write about her. I'm so excited.
Cavan, your past Star Wars stories have been, I'll say, pretty straightforward because they've been adventure stories for readers of all ages. But your short story, in a certain point of view, Time of Death, is quite a departure from that straightforward adventure because you're basically doing a surreal, time-twisting examination of Obi-Wan Kenobi before, during, and after his death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a type
That was a really good idea when I thought about it.
Tell me how that came about.
Well, it was one of those moments. I'd just seen the episode of Rebels when Ben's in it and he sees Luke run across. And so from that moment I wanted to write a Ben story. But then I thought, of all the moments, when's it going to be in the film? And they say your life flashes in front of your eyes when you die, but what's that like when you're a Jedi and you're going to go somewhere else? And so it's the idea that he knows what's coming even before he walks down that corridor. And so it's, yeah, and then when you start thinking about it, you realise what that's going to be. So it just gives you the chance to tell a story that goes right the way across his time on Tatooine as well. So go right back to his arrival and then his departure.
Now, were you aware of Claudia's story, or were you two aware of what you...
No, that would have been an excellent thing to be aware of.
I know, it would have been quite good, wouldn't it? Yes. So what happens in yours?
Yeah, the dead Jedi crew.
I will say, they work amazingly well together, because you understand that Obi-Wan has experienced something that Qui-Gon has already knows. And
Qui-Gon still gives Obi-Wan a note in mind. You know, he gives him a final push right at the end.
Great stuff. Now, Kate, your story, By Whatever Son, has Niara Larte, who first appeared in the Ahsoka novel, and it turns out that she was in attendance at the medal ceremony at the end of A New Hope.
Yes, she was.
So how did that come about as an idea?
I actually got to work with Ashley Eckstein on the project. Yeah, she's pretty great. And she had emailed me and was like, I want to see if we can put like female pilots in the front row. And I was like, yes, we can definitely do that. And so that's kind of how it got started. And we just sort of went from there with her crew standing, watching the medal presentation from the back, but from the front row.
Now, I know that, because I was there, that you recently got a chance to, before this book was even published, read an excerpt of it at Salt Lake City Comic Con. Can you tell me how that went?
So we were on, Zoraida and I were on a panel at Salt Lake Comic Con, and we got to read very short snippets. And Zoraida read hers, and everyone was like very entertained because it's very good. And then I read mine, and I like didn't look up until I was done. And when I looked up, everyone in the room was crying. And I was like, okay, that went well. It was the first thing I wrote after Carrie Fisher died. And it's really sort of, because usually when I'm sad I watch Star Wars, but I couldn't. And then I wrote that, and then I could watch Star Wars again. So it's very personal, even though it's part of this massive project. But it really sort of helped me work through my grief after Carrie Fisher.
Especially that scene, because Leia is quite literally on a pedestal, and we're all looking at her as a beacon here. Yeah. Amazing stuff. Now, Pierce, your story, Desert Sun, shines a spotlight on Biggs Darklighter during the Battle of Yavin. Now, what, besides having the best non-Lando mustache in the saga, drew you to Biggs as your appointment?
You know, I'm glad you brought the mustache up, because I'm, to be honest, a little bit miffed. My title, initially, was turned down in favor of Desert Sun, and I wanted it to be The Last Mustache Ride. Personally, I think it has a great ring to it, but I mean, my connection to Biggs was always, as a kid, I saw Biggs as the character who's most like family to Luke, from a brother standpoint, and it was a really character that never really got explored too much. But then I read the X-Wing novels by Michael A. Stackpole, and we were able to explore through Wedge, through Tycho Selke, other people who had met Biggs, and see his backstory. And what I wanted to do was find meaning for Biggs in that last moment, because he does perish, but I wanted it to be in a moment of sacrifice, not just an accidental death in a conflict. And what was really fun to get to explore is the idea of the Force also moving Biggs, also moving all these characters to this one point of crisis where they could stop the Death Star. And Biggs found that, you know, Luke was this kid who was younger than him, who was less well off than Biggs, but was his best friend, but he looked at him in a young brother capacity. What I wanted to do is explore how through the battle, Luke became someone that Biggs looked up to. By how Luke first recklessly charged into a situation, and then how Biggs saw him evolve over the course of the battle, and began to respect him and realize that it wasn't Biggs' battle, it was Luke's, and he was there to help him. And so that was fun for me to explore through my own personal attachment to, you know, the brother character, and just shine some light on Biggs and somehow his thinking in his final moments.
Great. Now, Jason, you also focus on the end battle, the Battle of Yavin, through your short story, Duty Roster. We meet a pilot who doesn't quite make the cut to make that final attack on the Death Star. And you took a character that could have, well, I'll say this much, is a pretty deep cut when it comes to Star Wars lore. But you told a story that you don't need to know that deep cut to appreciate and understand it. So I want to ask you, because I know how deep down these rabbit holes you can go, how did you find that balance of making sure you weren't writing something that only I would get?
Well, that's the real trick, isn't it? No, it's funny. Yeah, over here on Team Wingman, I had the idea for this story, and it's very hard to talk about this story without spoiling it. So I'm going to try to work my way around it. So yeah, I had this really geeky Star Wars semi-retcon lore idea, and I brought it up particularly because my first choice had already been taken, and I brought it up and was like, what do you guys think? And I kind of looked, hopefully, and everybody kind of laughed, and I was like, whoo, all right, I'm going to do it. And then I realized that, so I had kind of mistaken identity and, the folks left behind in the rebel base, etc. But I realized also that that was great, but I had about 300 words. And that was when the fear set in. And I was like, all right, so now I've got like a good kind of joke, and I've got to pivot that into a real story that's going to land emotionally. And that's when I got really scared and got to work. So
that's we're wingmen, so we're supposed to be scared.
Yeah, exactly.
We're red shirts.
Yeah, we know how it's probably going to end.
Now, Pierce and Jason, both of you had to do the exercise of basically taking that end battle blow by blow and breaking it down and understanding what it meant as very specific characters. Did you find any new discoveries about that end battle by taking a very specific point of view?
Yeah, we were actually discussing this in the behind that curtain. I almost said green room, but it was behind the curtain. And we were talking about Wedge when he bugs out at the battle, when he's in the trench and he has to leave. And he's the only Alliance fighter pilot that we see during the battle leave. And we wonder, he's there to be a shield for Luke so he can launch the torpedo, right? So why does he leave? He can still use his ship to block the TIE fighters behind them. So we both came up with an internal rationale for it, which is pretty similar. And I don't want to ruin for our stories because, I mean, it's a heavy component, particularly of yours. But a lot of it was finding the hidden rationale and the gaps. And also seeing the POV of another fighter pilot when Luke, for instance, goes after a turbo laser cannon and has to pull up at the last moment. He says, Luke, pull up, because Luke is going in rashly. And also, you see how Luke abandons his wingman several times. And you get to explore what it's like trying to deal with a farm pilot when you're in a closely knit, cohesive unit, and this guy's going off blowing up turbo laser cannons.
Yeah, I think, one rule I keep in mind for myself as a writer is everyone is the hero of his or her own story. And so all those pilots who went up there at Yavin, or who didn't, imagine themselves as the person who was going to blow up the Death Star and save the galaxy. But that's not fated to be. So how, kind of in the kind of experiential gaps, if you will, how do you live with that? How do you live with that if you're in the battle and wound up doing something else? How do you live with that if you didn't make it to the battle at all? And so, yeah, that was a really fun thing to explore.
And I'll be exploring that and showing the pivot where they think they're the center of the story, and then they see a pivot and see that someone else is a really fun narrative thread to play with, because it shows how everyone can become selfless in the end, particularly wingmen, and how the Alliance itself is so sacrificial. It is essentially like a team of martyrs, and you begin to see them have that realization, and it's kind of wonderful to write.
Fantastic. Now, Claudia, in your book, in your short story, there's a moment in there where, in the discussion between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, the topic of Anakin comes up, and the topic of blame and absolution of blame comes up, which is a conversation. Again, it's one of these things I never realized how much I wanted to hear that conversation until it was finally presented to me. Can you talk about the development of that idea?
Yeah, it's always been of interest to me because obviously something really goes wrong with Anakin, and my personal theory, which is not canon by any way, was always that the structure of the Jedi, it clearly worked for, say, Obi-Wan, and I'm assuming Qui-Gon, who came in as infants and were raised through this, but then you bring in Anakin as an older boy, and he has a mother who's out there that he isn't with, And to some extent, I'm not sure Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan were able to wrap their heads around how much you might need it, because they didn't have that. They didn't have that kind of background. And so I always felt like there was that deficiency there, and Obi-Wan simply, like, his background had not given him enough to understand exactly how to compensate for that. And, you know, I wanted it to be clear, like, I wanted them to admit mistakes were made, because they were, but at the same time, Anakin's fall has to be Anakin's choice.
Right.
Because if it's not, then that undercuts absolutely everything. And so I wanted to sort of make it clear, like, yes, we see all these errors, but we understand that, you know, Anakin's becoming Vader is purely his decision and choice.
Mm-hmm. Now, it must have been the will of the Force or some mysterious cosmic thing, but Cavan, Meg, and Claudia, you've all chosen characters to write about from a point of view after their death. and I know that for Cavan and Claudia, that's kind of given...
yeah, Qui-Gon's going to be hard to get in there anyway.
But that wasn't necessarily the only way you could have tackled Beru. So I was just, if you could talk about that decision and what that meant and how you framed your story.
I wanted to have my story kind of be like, look, Amber doesn't have very many lines for one thing, so it was kind of hard to figure out how to write her story unless I went back through time and did a different version. But I almost wanted her to be having her say after death as in the form of an interview almost, because she had a lot to say about the choices that she could have, the things she could have done if she hadn't had this baby thrust upon her by this crazy old Jedi. She had dreams. She was a girl who had some dreams, and yet she chose to stick around and raise this kid that wasn't hers, and it ended up she had a great life, and I think she just wanted to get that message across. I kind of pictured it like she was sitting at that big bonfire in Endor after the last battle in Return of the Jedi, just telling somebody, some kind of interviewer, about that she was pleased, maybe with the ghost of Ben Kenobi.
Over a glass of blue milk.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, things worked out. I'm pleased at how things happened. But just to let you know, I could have done other things. So I kind of like that idea. It's a really nice time, I find, because in a lot of our storytelling that we're doing now, we finally got to tell, and Claudia, you were part of this, Queen Brea Organa, and make her a character. And so, and Madeline Rose does an amazing story with her in the short story anthology. But I think, like, I can't say enough how much I'm so happy Aunt Beru's not being taken for granted anymore, because Queen Organa is this big, shiny beacon that people are like, yeah, let's find out who helped shape Leia in that regard. But I'm always like, yes, but, Aunt Beru. Don't forget her. Aunt Beru, yeah, she instilled all these great qualities into Luke and was really there for him. So I think it's great that we're giving the caretakers their little voice. It's great. Cavan, in your exploration of the things that Obi-Wan sees at the moment of his death, you go through the 6 movies, or the movies that he was part of. You go through Clone Wars, and you have Rebels elements in there. But there's a moment where you actually go into the future, too, and elements that Obi-Wan was not actually part of. Can you talk about that and the decision to do that?
Well, it's just the idea that, obviously, we don't want to know what it's like to become a Force ghost. Hopefully most of us don't. But yeah, it's just the idea that actually at that point of death, he might see things that are yet to come. Not in a prophecy kind of way, but just get flashes of these people that he's invested so much of his life in. And I think that's the thing I really wanted to, the majority of the story takes place during the fight with Darth Vader. And I wanted to explore that, like, who is Obi-Wan imagining underneath the mask? Which Anakin is he seeing? Is he seeing the Anakin yelling at him, I hate you? Or is he seeing the boy? Or is he seeing the pilot sitting beside him when he's moaning about flying? It's just all those moments. And yeah, so it's the case of, he's watched Luke as well all the time. He's watched Luke grow up from a distance. And we've got a moment in there when we find out he's been whittling spaceships that he leaves outside for Beru to find and give Luke. So he's trying to train Luke in the ways of being a pilot from a distance by leaving toys. And I also love the fact that Star Wars figures would have toys of Star Wars ships. So it's just like, that family is the most important thing in Obi-Wan's life. He didn't set out to be that, and so he wants to see it through. So I wanted to give that little moment when perhaps he sees stuff to come.
Well, in the interests of balance of the force, I'm going to ask what you guys would have done had your assignment been to pick someone from the evil side of the spectrums, from the dark side, from the Imperial side. So I don't know who wants to start. Obviously, you're the darkest.
Yeah,
most evil
I am the
person here,
darkest,
so.
yeah. No, I'm totally jealous of Mallory's Mahdi story, because every single time I see that scene, I think, that has to be that guy's first day. You know, like, you can see everybody else around the table's like, here it comes. You know? And you get the sense maybe like everybody's first day is a little bit like this. But there's no way you've been in multiple meetings with the Darth Vader and pull that. You know? So, yeah, it would have been really tempting to delve into that.
I actually got the idea to write about Aunt Beru, not only just because I really have always loved her, but because I saw a guy at Halloween a couple years ago dressed as a stormtrooper, and he had a big sign around his neck that said, "I shot Aunt Beru." And I was like, first I laughed because that was hilarious, but then I said, oh my God, that's so terrible. And then I started thinking, when they first asked me about this, I was like, I originally obviously said Aunt Beru, but then I started thinking, oh my God, it would be so funny to be that guy, to write from his point of view. Like, I'm the guy who shot Aunt Beru, and now he's like in terrible post-traumatic stress because he killed Luke Skywalker's aunt, and he's doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and he's just an alcoholic and trying to get through his life because he just killed this innocent old lady who was so nice and just gave everybody blue milk. So that's who I would have written about. But I actually talked about it with Elizabeth, and she's like, too dark, no. That's not you, lady, that's not you, so.
I want to read that story. For me, I think the torture droid, I'd quite like, because in my mind he's quite fussy, and he doesn't like the fact, you know, his syringe has to be really sterile, you know, and people are pushing him through, and a droid torturing just seems bizarre, you know, because he'll have checklists he'll have to go through and protocols, and you know, Darth Vader would be getting really annoyed with that. Well, you get on with it. Well, actually, I can't, because I've got to do this, and this, and this, and this, and that. So yeah, so I think torture droid sort of stories, that's my future.
Known famously as Dr. Ball, thanks to Robot Chicken. That's what we call him internally. All right.
I would really like to write Palpatine. I think he would be interesting.
And why is that? I need to unpack this, because you are like the nicest person I know. And now you're telling me you want to write Palpatine.
I'm playing a very long game, clearly.
Just like Palpatine.
Just like Palpatine. Like, I loved watching him in the Clone Wars when he keeps like throwing Anakin at Dooku, and every time Obi-Wan like swings in at the last minute, and Dooku thinks that Obi-Wan is his nemesis, but really it's Anakin, and they're just like training him up. And then there's that look in Revenge of the Sith when Dooku looks at Palpatine and is like, "Excuse me?" And Palpatine's like, "Oh yeah." This is like plan AABCF136. Like, I have so much going on right now, and you're like a footnote, basically. I love that.
All right. Follow that up, Pierce.
Yeah, well, I think I'd have to say I'll be one of the stormtroopers tracking the droids. I'd write that because, you know, we have the technology to blow up planets. We have the technology to travel light speed, but I'm riding around in a goddamn lizard. There's scout troopers with speeder bikes. There's ATSTs, and I'm on a lizard. And I want to know, does he have to muck out the lizard stall? Does the dewback, does it smell bad? Does it chafe right here? Because I mean, we're talking about metal blast armor on scale. That can't be fun. So I'd basically be a dewback trooper, a dew trooper.
There you go. Do the do. All right. Jason, how about yourself?
A character that really intrigues me is Kylo Ren, because it's the inverse of the hero's journey. The villain is not, he's not this huge unassailable villain. He's kind of a villain trying to prove himself and find his place in villaindom. I thought that was a really interesting storytelling choice. And you know, one of the many fun things about my current project is I actually get to do that a little. Which is,
I was going to say, boy, we have a book for you. Jason, actually, I want to end it on you, because you and I have talked about this book as longtime Star Wars readers and fans. and getting something like this book, which is something, again, you'll hear this theme over and over again, something we didn't know we wanted until we got it. And what your impression was it, both as an author and as a fan, as a reader? Because I think you've talked about this, and I really like what you had to say about it.
Oh, this, you know, I'd been so excited for this project, and then the book arrived, and I was so excited, and I canceled out my schedule. Sorry, the novelization was a day late because I had to read a certain point of view. And but I had this, I think, very writerly response reading all the stories, and it was twofold. Like, as an author, I was like insanely jealous because I was like, oh my God, that one's so good, that one's so good, that one might be better than mine. And then the next one that was true, and it kept happening, and I was like, oh. But as a reader and as a fan, I was just blown away. I was so excited and so happy because everything was just this perspective I'd never imagined, and was so happy to read. So that was this really fun double vision, seeing all of that.
Well, thank you for contributing to that, and thank you, all of you, for contributing to this amazing book. So let's hear it for this group of authors. Now I'm going to invite Marc out here to give us a special reading from a certain point of view.
All right. So I'm going to read an excerpt from the short story There Is Another by Gary Schmidt. And to give you some background, this answers the question of what was Yoda doing during the events of A New Hope. And he senses the passing of Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan is now appearing to him on Dagobah. So this is just a very brief scene from that story. Yoda crossed the room and sat down in his bunk. It was no longer as damp as it had been. I'm old, Master Kenobi. 900 years is old, he agreed. And worn out. Not so worn out as you might think, Master. Where is my pot? Yoda looked up at the empty shelf. There was an encounter, he said. An encounter? Not so difficult an encounter that you were unable to preserve Qui-Gon's cloak, I see. Always with you it has to be both. Difficult choices must we sometimes make in this world. As now, Master. Here you are for that. Master, I want you to take on a new Padawan. You do you? I want you to train young Skywalker. Yoda felt his heart thrill. He had not imagined it could have happened, but here it was. Yes. You agree so quickly? Long have I wanted to train her. Master, I want you to train Luke. Yoda looked at the shimmering face. No, he said. He stamped his cane on the floor. That is not the one. Not ready is he. Who is ever ready? Not that one. A Jedi must have the deepest commitment. That one looks from one cloud to another. A Jedi must have the most serious mind. That one cannot keep his mind from his speeder. Not him. Her. Master, he will not finish what he begins. He is reckless. Master, and well we know the path a reckless one will set his foot. The end.
Thank you very much, Marc. All right, we're bringing out our final flight. We've had dark side, we've had light side. Now this is a rogues gallery of everything in between. And I'm going to introduce them as they take a seat next to me. First up, we have someone who I can't believe I did not meet until just moments ago. Delilah Dawson is the author of the Blood series, Servants of the Storm hit, Wake of Vultures, and other short stories and comics, and she's written in this galaxy before, telling the tale of Bazine Natal in the e-novella The Perfect Weapon, and most recently, she penned the badass best-selling novel Phasma for us. Next to her is the author of such novels as Blackbirds, Atlanta Burns, Zeros, and the YA Heartland series. He's also the author of the Aftermath trilogy of Star Wars novels, Mr. Chuck Wendig. Next to Chuck, we have Zoraida Cordova. Now, she is the author of the Vicious Deep trilogies and the On the Verge series and the Brooklyn Brujas series, and this is her first foray into writing for official Star Wars fiction. So welcome, Zoraida. Next, we have the best-selling author of Star Wars Kenobi, Star Wars A New Dawn, The Lost Tribe of the Sith series, and the Knights of the Old Republic comics series. He's also one of the contributing authors to the forthcoming Last Jedi-inspired anthology novel Canto Bight. John Jackson Miller is with us. Next, we have the author of such novels as Playing for Keeps, A Shambling Guide to New York, and you may know her from her podcast, I Should Be Writing an Angry Robot Books podcast. It's Mur Lafferty. And at the end, we have an author who's known for his comics work on such titles as Daredevil, She-Hulk, Death of Wolverine, which became the basis for the Logan movie, and several series on Marvel's current run of Star Wars, including a fantastic Lando miniseries, which is quite relevant to our discussion today, as well as the current run of Star Wars Darth Vader. His debut novel, The Oracle Year, is due out next year. Mr. Charles Soule is with us. Hello. So, Delilah, you get to tackle a character that I did not expect you to tackle, but it's great because you get to pour in a lot of detail and characterization into someone who has remained a blank slate for a surprisingly long time. And we're talking about, well, what drew you to explore the secrets of Long Snoot?
I got a thing for big noses. Morally ambiguous characters is kind of my jam as a writer. And you look into him, as you get invited to this, there are fewer and fewer dance slots available on that card where you're like, wasn't there a guy in the background that like punched Toronto's butt? So I originally wanted to do Momal Nadon, the Ithorian, but once you look into him, like he's already got a really great origin story that covers exactly the period of time from this. But you look into Garandan and they're like, we don't know. Is he the greatest spy? Is he very rich? Is he a gambler? And I was like, oh, he's many things. It was also really fun to write a character that, in Star Wars, like, I was always first drawn to the aliens. Like, you see the cantina scene and all these crazy guys and the Ewoks that I love, but we always focus on the humans, so it's fun to write an alien species that's like, it's very alien. He eats different things. He has 2 sets of teeth. He has different interests. He really doesn't care about the Millennium Falcon or the Empire. He just he cares about the Empire, but in a different sort of way. But he has business of his own completely outside of the movies.
Now, a place like Tatooine, and especially the Mos Eisley Cantina, it's not a place you want to take a deep breath in and savor the aromas, but...
Banthas and dewbacks are fine animals.
But you chose a character with the biggest honker in the movie, and you had to write a perspective that really takes a secondary sense for us humans and turns it into a primary sense. So can you talk about doing that?
So I have this thing called synesthesia, which is when some of your kind of senses cross. So like, all of my numbers have colors and feelings attached to them and letters, and I almost got kicked out of kindergarten for arguing with the teacher that W was not yellow, it was pink. So it was really cool to walk through and think about in this world the things that you would smell and the things that you would see and the things that would be a different consideration as someone who sees a different spectrum of light, which also explains why he wears his big goggles all the time. I think whoever wrote Biths had the same... Didn't Mur start with that? Like, boy, this is a sucky planet to be a Bith.
Yeah.
So it's not a great planet to be an insect. He's not a big fan of eating moths, but that's what you got to eat on Tatooine. So it was fun to walk through, and instead of being like, oh, this is the spice market, you're like, oh, this is nasty.
Now, Chuck, your story is We Don't Serve Their Kind, and you take a look at the surliest, meanest-looking, sour-faced human with Star Wars screen time. Woo-her, the bartender. So what drew you to that ugly mug? And how much of that ugly bartender is inside you?
You ate the bartender?
Yeah.
He lives in my heart. He's he's my patron saint in this world. A drunk, cranky man in a dusty bar. I think the popular misconception, right, about the prequel films is that they are there to help us understand and contextualize the journey from Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader. But I find that the prequels are there to explain why Wooher is mad at droids. So that's sort of how I built into it. I'm like, why? I need to know why he doesn't like droids. Like, they're kind. Like, they're not going to drink him dry or anything. They're just coming in. He's like, no, get out. You're done here. And I wanted to contextualize that and then give him this sort of rich backstory. Because once upon a time, droids terrorized the galaxy, thanks to the prequel. So he has that little seed of his story starts there.
Fantastic. Now, Zoraida, in your story, You Owe Me a Ride, you get to showcase the infamous Tonica sisters. What drew you to them? And you get 2 characters for the price of 1, so that's a pretty
I do
shrewd
get 2
deal.
characters for the price of 1, and I think that I went to, when we were trying to pick our stories, I went back and I looked into who I would want to write the most, and there are these 2 women in this cantina where there's no one else who appears to be women. Like, they're the most obviously female looking, and I'm like, why are they there? How are they there surrounded by like all of this scum and villainy? Because obviously they are part of that world. And I've always been drawn to characters that straddle the line of morality. You know, like, you do things to survive, and I love these survivalist characters. And so I kept asking the questions: how do these 2 sisters survive in this galaxy full of bros, basically?
The broest of bros at that cantina, too. Yeah. Jan, in your story, Rights, we take a look at the Tusken Raider party that basically surprises Luke during his search for R2-D2 in the Jundland Wastes. What brought you to these characters, which, you know, on the surface are pretty interchangeable and superficial, but you go sort of behind the mask of characters like Akoba and the Chieftain Ayark. So tell me about that.
As a kid, I remember watching and seeing how, you know, and I'm sure that Marc Thompson can do this better, but these guys here, and suddenly for them it's like Monty Python and the Giant Rabbit, run away, run away! And you realize there's got to be a backstory there, and so I thought about that, and then I remembered, oh yeah, I wrote a backstory for this. It rhymes with Shinobi, and in that book I had established that the Tuskens were bound by a curse to live on Tatooine, because who else would, and also that they were pretty much the only people who had figured out that Obi-Wan was a wizard, because, again, he is. And so approaching this story and realizing that there was no reason that I couldn't draw from it, because we do draw from things that have been established in the past about cultures and that sort of thing, I figured, well, let's just advance this 19 years. What would they be thinking now? They would be thinking that, well, there must be some pretty powerful magic binding this wizard to this planet, and they also would have had 19 years of being scared away every time they got near anything they shouldn't go near. And so I was really delighted to be able to draw upon that, and certainly to bring Ayark back into the picture.
Now, Mur, your story, Not for Nothing, is presented as an excerpt of a much longer account told by one of the members of the Cantina band.
Right.
I thought that was an interesting construction in terms of how you wanted your story to be a piece of a larger puzzle. But also, I just wanted to know what drew you to the band, and what story interested you as far as that exploration goes.
Well, as Delilah said, if you read up about the Bith, there's nothing in their physiology that makes you think Tatooine is anywhere they would ever want to go. They have lidless eyes. Their eyes are huge. They have milky white skin, 2 suns, bunch of sand. That's a bad place. And so I figured they had to be there for a very compelling or bad or violent reason. And I don't actually remember why I wanted to make it a book inside a book. I guess I wanted to go memoir style, where you want to tell what happened, but you want to make it sound good. You want to make yourself look good, and she may have embellished a couple of things that happened in the story, but I just thought it would be fun to say, you know, you've got the old washed-up rocker who does their memoir. Well, this is hers, telling about the modal nodes' glory days and that time they were on Tatooine too.
That was the vibe I got when I read that it was part of a larger story. I thought, oh, this is like Almost Famous. Like, this is what comes out of that trip, and it's now in the same, you know, in the record store as well as the bookstore in that section of, like, you know, musical tones. So, Charles, you, for your story, The Angle, you focus on someone who actually isn't in A New Hope, but turns out is A New Hope adjacent. Little did we know. And you get to this particular vantage point into a key event from that movie. I'll let you tell us who that is, along with why you chose this particular angle to go with.
Well, I'm going to hit the second question first. You guys asked me to, or invited me to write a Lando Calrissian comic a few years back, which I did. It was one of my favorite experiences writing for Star Wars. It was just super, super fun. And so when this project came around, I wanted to do the sequel that's actually a prequel, because that's something that's very much part of Star Wars tradition, as we know. And I just really wanted to write Lando again. Lando's the best. But even more than writing Lando again, I wanted to write Lobot again, which I did. My sense of so this takes place in A New Hope. It's before Empire Strikes Back, and he's already kind of a scumbag in Empire Strikes Back. So this is like further removed from that. My sense of Lando Calrissian is that he's a guy who takes this very interesting journey from, like, a guy who thinks he knows everything, he understands all the rules about the way the galaxy works, and he's out to get his, right? Like, he doesn't really care about this stupid galactic rebellion. His life is not going to change too much, whether the Empire falls or rises, as long as he can find a card game. And so the story was about a guy who thinks he knows everything. He's smarter than everybody else. He knows how the system works, seeing something that really, really sort of shakes his faith in his own understanding of how everything works. And the nice thing is that A New Hope, conveniently, gave me a very particular moment that I could use to shake his faith, so to speak. And so it's kind of the start of the path where it's the first moment where Orlando's like, man, maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. And then Lobot's there, which is great. And that's kind of the story. So that's really where it came from. I think Lando has one of the most interesting journeys through the whole saga, all the films. And I just want to sort of stealth write as much as you'll let me write Lando and Lobot. So if I could do a Butch and Sundance Lando Lobot book, yes.
Sounds like there's a lot of interest in that. I gotta say, I am loving this Lando renaissance, because I always thought he was an underdeveloped, unused character as far as additional fiction goes. And now, kicking off with your comic series, we've been giving him a lot more opportunities, and I can't wait to see what, you know, Mr. Glover does with him.
Yeah, seriously, amazing, right?
Lando's finally getting this. We always knew he had star power, but now he's finally.
So did he.
Yeah, exactly.
So Pablo, this chair here, is this your chair?
Perhaps.
Have you told them about your story?
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. I definitely fall on the villain side of things, and my story is Verge of Greatness, and it's about Tarkin not being able to enjoy what should be his triumph of having a powerful and active Death Star, because he keeps thinking of Krennic. He can't get Krennic out of his head because he never realized how much that guy just bugged him. And it started from me asking the question, what would have happened if Krennic was in charge of the Death Star during A New Hope, and how would things have been different? And I'll admit, I love Tarkin, and I especially love Krennic. I love what Ben Mendelsohn brought to him, and I think he's misunderstood, and I think there's something to be said about these two characters. One is a politician and a military man, and the other is an engineer. And they both approach the Death Star from a very different point of view, and so that was the impetus behind my short story. So
you're saying that it is a Taylor Swift Katy Perry fanfic?
Pretty much. But I'm not going to tell you who's Taylor and who's, because that's something, I don't want to ruin that illusion. I want readers to discover that themselves. Delilah, have you heard the audio rendition of your short story?
No, who did it?
It's Mark did. I don't know if he's still around here, but...
Did he do an awesome Kobos voice?
Yeah, here's the thing that surprised me. I listened to it just yesterday because I wanted to hear what his take on it. And Marc, this is like a trooper. He does the whole story in a Kuba's voice.
So I owe him like a whole bunch of like Altoids or, you know.
Yeah. So I don't know if you got it in you. If you want to do it, I'm putting you on the spot here. Can you give us a little long snoot for us?
I'm on here for the sparrow I'm trying to find.
So it works. The whole story is presented in that voice, and amazingly it works. So hats off to you, Marc, for taking that on. Chuck, there's a name drop at the end of your story where you make mention of the night shift bartender for the cantina.
Yeah.
For those who haven't read it, I'm sorry, I need to spoil this. I need to get this out there because it's too big to keep secret. Can you please tell us which name you tucked in there and what the reaction was from people you told that you put in there?
Are you talking about the holiday special reference?
Yes.
Acmina, come on! Yeah, just a little brief, tiny reference there of Acmina and her relationship, and she's popping up. So we got a little lineage there to the holiday special, which is good.
You say it as holiday special. For many of us, it's a Golden Girls reference, and that's what we're taking.
It is a Golden Girls reference.
I gotta ask, Zoraida, do you have sisters?
No, I have a brother.
Okay. Did you two ever get into shenanigans and troubles at the kind of Brea and Sandy do in her
I mean,
story?
I wish. So when I was writing the sister dynamic, and for me the sister dynamic's really important. My YA novels all have sisters, but I was watching a lot of Fast and Furious, and so
well, it's about family.
Yeah, it's about family. So like the entire time I just keep picturing Vin Diesel going like, "We are family." You know, he doesn't sound like that, obviously. I can't do a good Vin Diesel. But for them, it's like ride or die. You know, like they're the only people they can count on this in this giant galaxy of like murderers and thieves and whatever. But with my little brother, he's not little, he's 25. We're the only two artists in our family, so we always have this like. We're the only two people that we can count on to understand each other when nobody else does. And so maybe I put a little bit of that in the girls. But they have blasters, so.
This actually goes for all of you, but I want to talk to Mur because we all had, as authors of this, the challenge of getting a story in somewhere within a 2,000 to 4,000 word range. And I'm sure we've all come up with ideas to move this beyond. So, especially with something like a band where you have multiple members, if you had the opportunity to expand your story, what would you add to it?
Well, I'd probably tell about cooler places that they played other than Tatooine. It was fun to talk about how they got there and how they got out. But as I said as I placed in the memoir, this is just chapter 3 of her memoir. Yeah. Just the bit on Tatooine is chapter 3. So I'm very curious to think about where I would start them. One point I make in the story is like, they're there because, you know, the band leader is the one that gets them in trouble, but they go with him because he is the best guy, and they don't want to play with anybody else. Even if he screws them and puts them on Tatooine, they will stay with him because they will not play with anyone else. And so that kind of loyalty is something I'd like to explore. Like, do they play in a better place? Do they ever go anywhere worse than Tatooine? So I think that's where I'd like to take it.
Now, Charles and John, you have something in common that you may not know, but because for Charles, for your short story,
Is he my father?
Yeah. You've ended up having to invent...
What day were you born?
I don't know, that wouldn't work, but...
You ended up having to invent a card game that has never been seen in Star Wars before, the game of Click Clack, is that right? Yeah. So, and John just recently did this for the Canto Bite anthology, so I don't know if you guys want to compare notes, but what's it like having to create a new card game, a new prop like that for your Star Wars storytelling?
Well, you know, if you're going to tell a Lando story, I mean, you don't have to put gambling in it, but I think he sees his whole life as one big, huge gamble and con, and so it's fun. I remember reading like Star Wars stuff, you know, many years ago, and they would put in like Sabacc and whatever. They would just refer to these games, but they would never really talk about the rules or how they were played. And so it was just like, I got a 9 of Jim Jams. Oh no, and like, but you don't know what that means. And so I wanted to invent a card game that Lando was in the start of the story. He's playing this game called Click Clack, and the premise of it is basically that each player gets one card and they're face down, and then you have a conversation with the other person, just talking for 10 minutes or whatever. And then at the end, you have to say whether you think your card is higher or lower than the other person's. And that's basically the whole bet. So the whole game is just based in the conversation, and so everybody's sort of trying to bluff each other, and like it's really, great, I think. So I wanted to come up with a whole game that would have the whole set of rules so that, little Charleses of today would not be like, dang it, I wish I knew how to play that game. So, that was kind of my inspiration. I just wanted people all over the world to start playing Click-Clack, and maybe they will.
John, you just recently went through an exercise like this.
Yeah, I invented Zenbiddle, which was actually, the name came from the West End books years ago, but I needed it for the Canto Bight story. I have some experience in this. I was reading books about card games as a kid, John Scarney, and I even just found the Maverick Guide to Poker the other day, which I'm just delighted about. The thing is that, and then later on I was the editor of Scry, which was the card game magazine for all the Magic players. So I have a lot of experience fiddling with mechanics of these things, and I knew that in the narrative of the story, I couldn't do what was done before, as you mentioned. I think Sabacc originally came from L. Neil Smith's Lando Calrissian novels, where he basically just took a tarot deck and made the cards all mirror and change and do all sorts of other things. But how you would actually play was beyond the scope of that project, and I realized I needed to know this. And so when I wrote my story, I sent a multiple screened PowerPoint to Pablo, establishing how the game is played, and we may be elaborating more on it. And of course, I also had my Pazak deck handy from Knights of the Old Republic, because that may come up too. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
You went above and beyond, and we thank you for that. And also, any time to enrich the Star Wars universe so that not everyone in the galaxy is playing the same card game over and over again. We really do appreciate it. So I will ask you guys to think about, if you didn't write who you wrote, who else would you have written about? But before I get to that, I just want to do a couple of things. First of all, I just can't say enough about this entire anthology and how important it is, and what a great read it is, what a great celebration of Star Wars it is, and what a great variety of storytelling it is. There's a charity component to it that I want to make sure everyone understands. First Book, leading nonprofit that provides new books, learning materials, and other essentials to educators and organizations serving children in need. Penguin Random House has donated $100,000 to First Book. All the authors have not taken any payment for this project. Of their fees all get donated for this charity, and Disney Lucasfilm has donated 100,000 children's books to support the First Book mission. What I also want to call out is it is no small editorial task wrangling 43 cats/authors into a singular Star Wars project, and I really need to give credit to Elizabeth Schaefer, who's standing over there, who made this possible. So I can't say enough what an incredible job you did and what an incredible book that we have because of it. So
can we actually have her come up and answer a question?
Yes. What do you think?
Yes.
Come on up.
Elizabeth.
Come on.
Here we go.
I think she should have to answer who she would write. Who she had to do it.
But
right.
you know what? We're going to give you a break. We're going to put you last so you have the most time to think about it. We're going to start with Delilah. If you didn't end up writing about Long Snoot and you had an opportunity, and since you guys are on the rogue side of things, you could choose a good guy or a bad guy, or both. Who would you have written about? Can't say fast one.
Well, no, okay, so I'm going to cheat. Because I want to tell you what I'd write in the next one, because everyone's already done everything. I want to write the Tauntaun midwife, who, when they come back, she's like, where are Snoodles and Mr. Muffinhead? They're like, well, we know where most of them is. Like, she birthed them from, she was up to her elbows in cloaca. She's like the Malakili of the Tauntauns.
Did you say cloaca?
Yes.
That's a very
Tauntaun cloaca?
They're lizards.
This is amazing.
That Twitter handle, Tauntaun Cloaca, is now instantly registered by someone.
It is live
in this
hashtag.
So, when the next book comes out, Taken, nobody else
All right.
can be up to their elbows in cloaca.
Snagged. All right. Chuck, what about yourself?
Well, there goes my answer. You know, like the easy softball answer would be I would take any of the characters from the Aftermath series, right? I mean, Ray Sloan or Sinjir could have a place adjacent. But there's also a part of me that's like, there's occasionally the vague reference that the Millennium Falcon has a personality. And like the droids interface with it and it can kind of answer questions and like there's something there and I would love to have, especially because it's like kind of canon adjacent, not really like official. I would love to get in the head, so to speak, of the Millennium Falcon.
After reading Chuck's story, I would go with Agnina because, like, I used to work at a bar, and the day shift compared to the night shift is a completely different story. So if, like, you had an arm cut off and a person die in the day shift, what do you get at night?
You get singing and dancing. That's what you get.
You get bleach.
Yeah.
You know, I envy anyone who writes Lando because Lando's the dude. I love him. And if I were doing something for The Empire Strikes Back, I would certainly look at doing the Huguenot whose job it is to clean out the vents because he's got to be there going one day finding lightsabers and Lando, what are you doing? What kind of parties are these going on upstairs?
Mur?
Everybody's saying a lot of sexy named characters, and I kind of want to lie, but honestly, if I hadn't written the modal nodes, I would have written about the two guys who drew the short star to be in the actual tube when the Death Star fires. Death Star fires, there's two guys over on the side going, why were they there? Those poor guys! What short straw did they draw? Who's on the other side of the wall going, oh, thank God that's not me. I mean, space cancer? I mean, there's all sorts of ways you could go. I really wanted to tell their story. I was worried about them.
I would choose Jabba the Hutt. At a very particular moment, it would be right after he meets Han Solo in like the hangar bay, and Han Solo's gone, and Jabba's like all pissed because his tail hurts because Han stepped on it, and he like goes in and he goes back to Tatooine. He's looking at his palace, he's like, I've got nothing on the walls. This place is drab and ugly. I don't know. I would write that story.
Well, I'd like to say three things. First of all, I hate you, Chuck.
You're welcome.
Second is all these folks are so amazing and I could never do what they do, so this is an interesting question. But my answer would be, and I'm actually surprised nobody wrote about him, is Wedge. I've just always loved that character. Like Pierce said, you know, he's this survivor, and but he's also doesn't just physically survive, he stays positive, and he just is this beacon of goodness for the rest of the series. And this is not my idea, this is Tom Holler, Editorial Genius's idea. But doing a scene from him after he dies, of watching Luke come clean out his crate that I guess a pilot would have, and that the yellow jacket that Luke wears in that metal scene is Wedge's, and that's his sort of tribute to his friend.
Oh. Nice. Well, thank you so much, all of you.
That's why I can't write stories.